So I'm just going to do this one kind of quick. This is really just kind of me theory crafting on something, and I don't have Shy here with me today just because this is a little spur of the moment for me. It's something I've been thinking about for just the past few days. I was a person who watched Pokemon when it first came out, so I was one of those ones that was there at the very beginning of it. And so season one was the season I started with. And I was rewatching it recently just for nostalgia's sake, and it got me thinking, as I am well enough into the Pokemon fandom, franchise, so forth and so on, that I am very well aware of many of the incidents and such that take place, have gone through with this series. And one of the biggest ones was episode 38, the incident that resulted in multiple kids in Japan getting seizures. And it got me thinking about how much that completely just threw off the entire schedule and everything for the series when that incident took place. Because at the time, when it went off the air following that massive major incident, it was possibly going to not be coming back. At least that would have been one of the possibilities, the other being that it would have come back, but much, much, much later on. Who could say for sure? But it really was something that it had a profound effect on not just the people, but on the show. And at this particular point, with what I'm theory crafting here, the scheduling of how the show was supposed to go. Initially, at least according to information I found online, the series was going to run for a year and a half, that being roughly about 78 weeks. That would be exactly a year and a half worth of time, with 52 weeks being 1 year, and another half of a year would be 26, totaling 78 weeks. Now, traditionally, I do believe that Pokemon has pretty much always aired in Japan on a Monday. And so, with there being some holidays and the like on Mondays in Japan, I calculated out roughly that about 8 weeks would be missed just by the case of holidays and the like. So a new episode would not air at that particular time for that week, and they would just skip over to the next week when that time came. And I think, going based off of my little thought process here, that I have figured out which episodes either did not exist prior to the episode 38 incident, or were shuffled around, or something happened. There was a definite scheduling plan with the way things were going to go. And I think I have a pretty solid idea of how many total original episodes were going to be for the Pokemon anime when it was originally going to run exclusively for a year and a half before becoming the big 20 season plus franchise series that it has since become. Of course, we all know that Pikachu's Goodbye was specifically created, that being episode 39, during the 4-month time frame away, as a thank you to all of the fans who petitioned and worked so hard in the background to get the series back on following that incident. And we know, just by its very nature, in fact, that one was entirely intended as a big thank you. It was even kind of a fourth wall break in the series, that Team Rocket thanked all the people for helping get it back up and running after what took place on episode 38. So we know that that episode did not originally exist. It was never part of the original roster. It was never even going to exist. It was never something that was planned. But it was added in as a thank you, and it became the new episode 39. Now, you can find plenty of this information online on websites like Bulbapedia and probably Cerebi and several other of those Pokemon-centric websites. And what you can find out with that information is you can find out which episodes got pushed back because of the incident on episode 38. And we know from that the Battling Eevee brothers wound up being an episode that got pushed back, that a good 5 or 6 total episodes got completely pushed back, and it changed the way schedulings worked. But something else that you can find out in that information by looking online is that the episode Princess vs. Princess was specifically intended to air on March 3rd. That is Girls' Day in Japan. That was specifically an episode created for that holiday. And there is also The Perfect Hero. That was an episode specifically created for Children's Day, which takes place on May 5th in Japan. And so it's a known fact that those episodes were planned specifically for those days, to air on those days as unique episodes. We also know that the episode 38 incident aired on December 16th of 1997, and that the episode Holiday Hijinks and Snow Way Out were Christmas time episodes, the Holiday Hijinks one specifically being one that would have aired on Christmas, and Snow Way Out would have either aired the following week, or it would have aired as a 2-part special for Christmas, whatever it may have been. And so a lot of that you can honestly just figure out just by comparing dates and learning exactly when these episodes were going to air. But what we don't fully know is what order these episodes were originally going to absolutely air in, and which episodes were kind of shuffled around a little bit in order for things to more or less make sense. Like, for example, I think, at least going from what my notes are going on here, I have possibly figured out which episodes maybe didn't even exist for this series, because by my calculations, with there having been a total of 82 episodes originally, and they're planning for it to run for a 78-week time period, if we allow for what I'm going to allow for being maybe a 2-month loss of time, either for holidays or for maybe like a small break in between, in order to allow time for more episodes to be created and worked on without having to completely overwork people, and there would have been maybe like a small time frame break. My calculations are that if there were no holidays that would have been skipped over, what they would have done is the March 3rd Girls' Day episode Princess vs. Princess would have aired, and then they would take a roughly 2-month time period break and then come back, restarting the series up on May 5th for Children's Day, allowing those 2 months to be like a season break, if you will. And by my calculations, everything works out in such a way that I do believe Pokemon anime would have originally had 70 episodes, and I think that I have narrowed down the 12 episodes that I don't think originally existed. And we already know Pikachu's Goodbye was one that didn't. We already know that that one was created as a thank you, and that it was never part of the original roster, so that already knocks one episode out of there. We're already down to 81. But I had a few that I was going back and forth on. It was around the mid-40s that I started thinking, okay, so these are the episodes that are not being listed on Bulbapedia or any other website as this episode was moved back, and therefore this episode is up for debate on whether or not it even existed. Originally, I had the song of Jigglypuff listed on here as episode 45, and it is one episode that does not say anywhere on Bulbapedia or any other listing that it was rescheduled. So my thoughts were originally that it was an episode that did not exist. And then I got to thinking, well, maybe instead of it not existing, maybe it actually got moved forward. Because following this incident, it's pretty safe to assume that episodes got shuffled around. At that point, keeping the consistent time frame schedule that they had originally planned was out the window. They lost 4 months of time frames, so at that point, it didn't matter what order the episodes aired in. And also, at this particular time frame, we are 6 episodes past when Ash had gotten his 6th badge at the gym, and his 7th badge didn't come around until episode 58-59 in the two-part two-parter of when he got his badge. And so that allowed between 32 and 59 officially a total of 27, 28 episodes for him to kind of just faff around, if you will, and do lots of different things. It was their opportunity to basically showcase more Pokemon, because prior to the incident with episode 38, the series was pretty erratic with when he got his gym badges. You know, he would get some badges 5 episodes later, a couple of them 2 episodes later, one of them 10 episodes later, another 7 episodes later. You know, going by that metric where they clearly were just going based off of what felt comfortable and getting to showcase Pokemon in such a way, in such a degree, we really can pretty well figure out from there that they didn't really have any sort of specific point wherein we're going to have this many episodes and then he'll get his badge. Compare that to later seasons where, if you really look at it, you can see that they have a pretty consistent time frame of 15 episodes is going to be the average. That's kind of where we get the averaging out to about 15 episodes, and then he gets another badge. And then he'll get another badge 15 episodes later. And that all kind of started around Johto to some degree. Johto started the patterning, and then they kind of tightened up that pattern just a little bit more in later seasons. Because if you go and you count the episodes in between when he would get a badge in Johto, you had as much as 23 episodes, I believe, and as few as 14 or 12. It may have been 12 episodes in between. But Johto was the start of their pattern where there would be a lot of filler in between important things. Compare that to season 1, where it was erratic, but it was never so much going on in between that it felt kind of exhausting to watch in that way. And it felt a little bit more consistent, especially since in season 1, one of their biggest focal points was to really showcase Pokemon in a way that made them still feel like normal, average, everyday animals with special abilities, doing normal, average, everyday things in the world. Sometimes interacting with people, sometimes just existing in nature as a wild animal. And there are definitely some things I can tell following the episode 38 episode incident where that vibe changed. And so going based off of that, and the fact that I can pretty well figure out that there was just a bit of shuffling, it's safe to assume that these episodes I'm going to talk about here are the ones that are definitely up for debate on when they took place and if they were even originally part of it. And as I was mentioning before I went off on my little rant there, the Song of Jigglypuff is one that I was 50-50 on. The issue being that it started a running gag that prior to this time frame following the episode 38 incident, they didn't really have a lot of running gags in the series. There was a few consistent things here and there, like Misty calling Ash out on her bike and all that. But this was one that persisted for a very long time in the franchise. And I don't think it was ever fully originally intended to be a running gag. I think it's something that they threw in there just to kind of add a little bit more comedic fluff. And in all honesty, with the way things happen on episode 38, the big amount of episodes they had in between not only added a lot of extra filler for them to showcase more Pokemon, but also helped them to try to get back into the good graces of the fandom at the time, that were probably still leery after that, especially since they also, in that 4-month time frame, had to go back and re-edit older episodes to slow certain animations down to not risk that cause of seizures happening again. And truth be told, I ultimately wound up removing the Song of Jigglypuff from my list as being one that did not exist prior to the episode 38 incident, even though it is not listed as being an episode that was rescheduled. I think instead what happened is it was an episode that was marked for a later point in the season and then got pushed forward, because one thing you will notice in the 27 episodes that happen between when Ash gets his 6th badge and when he gets his 7th badge is almost nothing of significance happens. No new Pokemon get caught. The only Pokemon that learns a new attack is Bulbasaur with his Solar Beam. And it's all just a whole lot of fluff with not anything truly significant happening. No new Pokemon get caught. Nothing new gets added to the roster, really, except for Togepi, and I will get to that. And the simple thought process going on here is really that this was an episode that was probably planned, but was intended to go closer to the time frame of Ash getting his 7th badge, and then it got pushed forward just to help add a little bit more comedic filler. So I ultimately took the episode out, but the next episode, episode 46, Attack of the Prehistoric Pokemon, is on my list as an episode that I don't think they ever originally intended. I think it's an episode that they created in order to really help showcase the fossil Pokemon, but I think their intentions were roughly to probably hold off on showcasing the fossil Pokemon until later. And this episode wound up being created and worked on in that time frame, and then just put in a little closer towards the end, or towards the beginning. And in thinking about it, I'm kind of contradicting myself here, because I did forget that that was where Charmeleon did evolve into Charizard. And that kind of changed a little bit of everything, but in all due fairness too, Ash didn't really pull Charizard out too terribly often. At least not in this series. It was always, well, I probably shouldn't because I'm afraid to work with him since he's so unruly and disobedient. So they didn't really pull Charizard out too often. So an argument could be made that either A, there wasn't an intention for that evolution right away, or that the episode would have maybe come much later and then it never was going to come as early as it did in the series at episode 46, or possibly that it wasn't intended to happen at all, and it could have very well been an episode that was created in order to help give more hype to the entire series because of the popularity of Charizard and because of the fact that they needed something to help draw the audience back in, and that would make for a big deal. So if the episode was intended to exist, it may have originally been intended to exist much later, probably closer to the point where Ash was getting ready to go into the Indigo League, and then they pushed it forward some. But I don't think initially that it was going to be a part of the original roster, just going based off of a few context clues here and there. One thing you'll notice with this series is, particularly with season 1, the animation style, how rich and dark the colors are on these cells as they're playing out. You can pretty well tell with some of these episodes that came a little later that their original way that they animated things was altered just a little bit, like the color schemes were altered just a little bit. Like, some episodes are just a little bit lighter in color by comparison to some of the earlier episodes that are a little darker in color. And so you can kind of tell by some of these episodes which ones were created later and where they probably got a different camera for photographing these cells that captured more light and therefore made the cells a little brighter in color. Because bearing in mind that this series first aired in '97, digital animation really wasn't prominent. It would be used mainly for like special effects and smaller things, little tidbits added here and there. But fully digitally animated, we know for a fact that the Pokemon series was traditionally animated up until somewhere in Johto around episode 240, give or take. And you know that that was when the change happened to it being digital, when Jessie's hair color changed from crimson to magenta. That is just a known fact in the entire series, that the color change from Jessie's hair is the marking point for when they went from traditional to digital media. So, going based off of that, we know that this was a point where they were animating traditionally, and I think they got themselves a camera that caught better light later on. And so you can see in some of these episodes where that camera that caught better light was making these cells just appear a little lighter, a little brighter, a little less hyper rich in their dark colors. And that episode is one where it really kind of comes through. It's not super dark. They really, I think, did something there with it, because considering that the episode took place in a cavern, in a cave for a good portion of the episode, they would have had to do some considerable tricks to really kind of keep it visible enough. Otherwise, it probably would have been a little darker and harder to read at times. And this is one of those episodes where it just kind of felt like an add-on. I think that's the best way to put it. Again, like I said, it's an episode where Charizard was popular, and following that 4 month time period, they also, of course, were able to gauge exactly which Pokemon were extremely popular with fandom, so they could gauge which Pokemon to really focus on. And if you really take a look at some of these episodes, you can tell how they put a showcase on a single individual Pokemon each time, even though several others might appear in an episode. There was a particular focus on a single individual Pokemon. This was an episode where it instead put a singular focus on a group of Pokemon, and then also gave you another big star in the Pokemon franchise and fandom. So this was an episode where I think they created it post or during the post 38 incident in order to really help reboost that popularity. Another one I have on there is the very next episode of A Chansey Operation. And that episode, it kind of really ties in with what I was talking about with the new camera. The episode looks a little lighter, it looks a little brighter. It doesn't look like it was using the same camera from previous episodes where the colors were a little darker, a little richer. The colors instead in this episode look a little lighter, a little brighter, a little less blurred. That was another thing, is that some of the older episodes, if you really look at it, some of the edges are kind of blurred in certain spots, like the way some of the backgrounds are shot, the way sometimes even the characters are. Sometimes they look a little out of focus, whereas with a chancy operation, it just looks a little crisper, a little cleaner. It doesn't look quite so out of focus as some of the earlier episodes do. And so, as much as I personally love that episode because it really gave yet another wonderful showcase of how Pokemon exists in this world where they'll even help in medical professions and such, I don't think this episode originally existed. I think really one of the things that you can also tell with some of the later episodes of even season 1 is we start to see the development of a pattern where there's a lot of Team Rocket comes in, does something annoying to mess with the group, they fail, they get blown off somewhere, and the episode ends on roughly nothing of true significance ever happening. It's just silly and ridiculous. With this episode, it's kind of one of the precursors to that episode, with another trope, if you will, coming in just a little bit later in the series that I'll talk about. And this is an episode where, even though it's much more subtle, we can see where the development into that filler episode sort of mentality that the Pokemon franchise took for a long time starts to come into play. And this is one of those episodes where it's a great episode, but I don't think that it ever originally existed in the franchise. I don't. Now, the next one on the list was A Holy Matrimony, and I took that one out entirely. I was 50-50 on it originally, but you can tell with this episode that it's back to that older camera that they were using. Colors are a little darker, a little richer. Sometimes things are just ever so slightly out of focus, and it's just enough that you can really pretty well tell that the episode was made in the earlier time frame before that 4-month hiatus. So this was an episode I ultimately did take out, but I thought about it originally alongside with so yet so far-fetched episode 49, but ultimately both episodes I took out of my thought process and determined that they were originally created within that time frame and were set to air a little earlier than they actually wound up airing. And with that, everything from here on is episodes where I'm pretty sure they didn't exist. I'm pretty sure they weren't ever going to be a part of the roster. I'm pretty sure that at this point, we get to where the episodes were just never going to exist. Immediately, we've got Who Gets to Keep Togepi. Now, part of my reasoning for episode 46 was because the Togepi egg was introduced in that episode. But as far as the Togepi being a major player, it really wasn't. It popped up here and there, so it's not out of the question to think that they just edited in a couple of scenes to make Togepi just ever so slightly a brief momentary focus in those episodes without being in any way a major focal point of the episodes, just because it wouldn't take too much just to tack on a few seconds and an extra minute of animation here and there to now introduce the second generation. And I think that they took that opportunity with that 4-month time period, and now Gold and Silver having gotten much closer to coming out at that point, of introducing Togepi then and there. So we can pretty well determine based on that Who Gets to Keep Togepi did not originally exist, was never going to be part of the roster, was not something that was ever going to be a thing, because my best guess would be that if it ever came in at all, it would have come in way towards the end. But at the same time, if we go based off the time frame, the series would have run from 97 to 98. And with it having originally just been slated for that, there would have been no point in introducing anything for season 2 unless things just went so well that there was going to be a push for a season 2 and Johto Pokemon coming into play. So I don't think that Who Gets to Keep Togepi was ever going to be a part of the original roster. It was only ever added in purely because of how it gave the first impressions of a Johto Pokemon and added just an extra little bit of a cute factor as well, which was something that they were kind of trying to start pushing towards a little bit. Again, with the later seasons really following a formula, this was kind of the start of a formula in its own right. And it just helped add that extra little something that helped make for another eye-catching, eye-grab. And it did start a trend, which was the introduction of at least one Pokemon from the next generation during the generation that we're currently watching. This was the start of that trend, but I don't think it was ever originally intended. And then we skip forward to episode 54, Case of the Canine Caper, and this is an episode that focuses on Growlithe. And honestly, my argument for this one is a little wishy-washy in a way on it, just that I think the reason why I don't believe it was ever intended to exist is at this point, Growlithe had already been at least featured twice. It was featured once in the Flame Pokemon-a-thon, and then it was featured once in Holy Matrimony, so it got 2 features already. Giving it a 3rd feature felt unnecessary and irrelevant in a way, but at the same time, it was a great showcase of a dog Pokemon doing dog things. With the Flame Pokemon-a-thon, we got an episode where Growlithe was being showcased as a herding dog to help keep corral animals kept in line, keeping everything in focus. And with Holy Matrimony, we got to see an example of Growlithe being the companion dog. And these are all things that dogs are known to do in the human world. So, going based off of that, having it be a police dog makes sense for the Pokemon, but at the same time, why feature Growlithe again for a 3rd time, except for the fact that it was a popular Pokemon? At the time, it was a really well-loved Pokemon by many, and probably very well-loved by many of the staff working on the anime. And so, finally giving it a full-fledged focal episode made sense, but at the same time made Growlithe kind of an oddball in that previously no other Pokemon had been featured that much in an episode that gave it any kind of a true highlight. Compare that to other episodes where really just if a Pokemon was featured, it was 1, maybe 2 or 3 at the most as main focals, but then others would be in the background. Growlithe was focal, but background focal. It was secondary and tertiary as far as the Pokemon being featured goes, but this was an episode where it finally got the forefront focus. But I don't think that it was ever originally intended, because it does also very much feel like that Generation 2 and onward filler. You know, you get a focus on a Pokemon, and the episode really doesn't matter much. It doesn't add anything. It doesn't account to anything. It doesn't really change anything. And it wouldn't have actually made a difference. Moving on, we've got the very next episode, episode 55, Pokemon Paparazzi, and this episode, it's pretty safe that it was definitely never intended. It was clearly an episode that was created in tandem with Pokemon Snap having been released, hence the character being called Snap in the anime. It was obvious that this episode was just never intended to exist. It was just an episode that basically helped to advertise another Pokemon game. And that was it. That's all the episode ever was. It didn't add anything, it didn't do anything, it didn't change anything. It made references back to the prehistoric Pokemon episode that, again, I think kind of helps add a little bit to that argument of credibility where I don't think the prehistoric Pokemon episode was ever intended to exist initially. Or at least not until much, much later. And I think this episode was one where they created it specifically just to help serve as additional advertisement for another Pokemon game. That's really it. The same goes with the very next episode, episode 56, The Ultimate Test. This is a nothing episode. This was really just kind of almost a pandering to the fans episode in a way of how much Pokemon knowledge do you have, and creating small little memes that we even know today, like the Jigglypuff seen from above thing, all that. It didn't add anything, and it started really that trend for Team Rocket where they went under disguise in order to do something completely random, still ran into Ash and his crew, but ultimately a whole lot of nothing happens in the episode. And it's just, it exists. It was, I think, created as an excuse to team swap more than anything, you know, giving Ash Team Rocket's team to battle with in the sort of practice competitive battling scenario situation that they were featuring in the episode, and to give Team Rocket the opportunity to also get to use Pokemon that you see on Ash's team. So I think it was fully created just to help kind of like pander to those what if questions they were probably getting. And that's it. Yeah, I don't think it absolutely was ever going to exist because it doesn't add anything. It doesn't feel like anything really particularly special or interesting. It's just kind of a funny little gag, if you will, and nothing more. And the next one, I'm still kind of 50-50 on, episode 57, The Breeding Center Secret. My reason for thinking that this episode did not exist was simply because it's kind of a backtrack in a way. We didn't really get to see any sort of focus on the daycare center that is featured in the game. And the daycare center in that game, in red, blue, yellow, green, all of that, comes after the Cascade badge, but before the Thunder badge. So it would have been more logical on a technical level to fit it in between gyms 2 and 3 than it would have been to put it in just here at the very end, or well, closer to the very end. And at the same time, I think it was really largely intended just to give Jesse and James a more serious foil, even within their own team, just to help add an extra bit of rivalry and help to maybe create a few more characters that they could call on as recurring characters just for some extra fluff. Because Butch and Cassidy were introduced in this episode, and this is where they would occasionally still pop in every once in Blue Moon, up through, I want to say it was at least up through Hoenn, maybe even up through Sinnoh, but I know that they completely disappeared there for the longest time, only to get their final reintroduction in this last series, having officially explained that they had quit Team Rocket and moved on with their lives. And honestly, it wasn't a bad idea. It was a fluff episode. It was just pure fluff. It wasn't really anything to be taken seriously. And it was just another one of those episodes they just needed a little more time in between. but it would also be the last episode before Ash would finally take on his battle with Blaine for the 7th gem, because that happened in episodes 58 and 59, at least here in the US. Over in Japan, I think it would have actually technically been more like episode 60 or 61 by that counting time frame. I'm not sure. So it was definitely just one of those episodes where it was just there to help create more characters, to give more something to run with for comedic impact. That was it. And it also was there to kind of give an idea of the breeding aspect that is in the games, as well as probably to help even advertise breeding aspects to some degree, since, again, Johto was when you first got to really actually breed Pokemon for eggs. So it was probably as like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. This is how you do this, but in the anime way. I don't know. It's just an episode that I don't think was going to exist, and then it became one. The next one would be episode 62, Clefairy Tales, and this is just a complete nonsense episode. This is just taking the concept and idea from episode 6 all the way back at the beginning of Clefairy being from the moon, and just running with it in full-on Clefairy is an alien, now Jigglypuff's an alien, anything that evolves by Moonstone is an alien. It was just to create that cute little fight battle thing between Clefairy and Jigglypuff where they just double slapped each other back and forth nonstop. It's pure fluff, it's pure filler, and I don't think for a second they were even going to bother with it. But it was a way of also just kind of keeping the start of the running gag with Jigglypuff popping in to sing once in a while, but then the idea of it getting jealous at another cute Pokemon. It was just pure fluff. Moving on, we get to episode 67, and we have the P. Kahuna, I don't know how to say that. The episode where they introduce Surfing Pikachu. And yeah, I think this one was really just kind of like a, hey, check this out, because we're featuring it on the opening screen of Pokemon Yellow. That's honestly about it. Like, it's so nothing. It's such a nothing episode. It's silly, it's dumb, it's ridiculous. It's not even a particularly good episode, really. And it just gave fans the opportunity to see Surfing Pikachu animated. That's all that it was, so I don't think it was ever going to exist at all. And then the last two episodes I have here are a pair of episodes, so they're just going to be mentioned together. We got episodes 69 and 70, Lights, Camera, Quaction, and Go West, Young Meow. These two episodes featured a director trying to direct a movie featuring only Pokemon, and this was obviously just their way of being like, hey, check this out, we're about to have Pokemon the first movie come out. And this was like, just a reminder, Pokemon entering the movies for the first time, and it's going to be in the movie theater. That's all that these episodes were about, and that's all that they were for. And there would have been no need for those episodes if they had gotten the series done when they were supposed to. And so, going based off of everything that I have listed here, if we go in order, Pikachu's Goodbye, Attack of the Prehistoric Pokemon, A Chansey Operation, Who Gets to Keep Togepi, Case of the Canine Caper, Pokemon Paparazzi, The Ultimate Test, Breeding Center Secrets, Clefairy Tales, The P. Kahuna, Lights, Camera, Quaction, and Go West, Young Meowth, you have 12 total episodes that I don't think originally existed at all in this original run. It would have been 70 episodes. It would have ended a year and a half in, allowing 78 weeks to run 70 episodes, giving either a 2-month break between March and May, or allowing for 8 separate weeks where there would be a holiday that they wouldn't air an episode, and giving just enough time to completely run through the series start to finish, showcase Ash as this novice trainer, and really just to give fans of the games the opportunity to see the games that they love come to life on TV, but then also both be endeared by a character that doesn't have a clue what he's doing, but then also get to feel like a really great trainer when they're doing far better than he is. And I think that's really what they were going for with it. And these 12 episodes, they don't feel like they fit in with that really at all. They feel like the worst kind of filler, most of them. And the handful that don't feel like the worst kind of filler still feel a little off, like there's just something not quite fitting in with the rest of the franchise up to that point. And this is just where I think if we really just give it a little bit of thought, we can pretty well map out how things would have run had that incident never taken place. And by the end of it, we would have been 78 weeks in. A year and a half later, the series would have ended with Ash just looking up at the flame in the stadium and being relatively content with how everything went down, even though he did not win. And that would have just been where the series ended, and that's where I end this. So thanks for listening to my little nonsense of rant and thought process, and put in the comments what you think. If you think any of these episodes sound like a pretty sound logic thought process, or if it just sounds like a whole lot of nonsense. I don't know. I'm curious to see what you think. If you think there are any episodes that maybe you think out of season 1 weren't originally intended to exist, or that couldn't have possibly existed. We can go based off of information we know based on the websites that certain episodes that were definitely going to exist got pushed back. And we can pretty well map out, for the most part, when things would have come to just a relatively satisfactory conclusion when all was said and done. So pop in the comments what you think. Maybe there's something interesting there. Maybe you've got some different ideas. I will tell you that I was 50-50 on Bulbasaur's Mysterious Garden, because it is an episode that doesn't fully feel like it needed to exist and was possibly a filler. But it was also an episode that gave Bulbasaur Solar Beam, but then he didn't really use Solar Beam much there after that, except in the Pokemon Indigo League, which if he had never learned it, just would have never been a thing that he would have had for at least a while. Maybe it was something that they were considering would have come later, if at all, and then moved it forward. I don't know. It's definitely in that time frame where there was clearly a lot of shuffling, and once the exact time frame for episodes was lost, it didn't matter which episodes aired when. It didn't. It no longer mattered in the slightest, and you could do whatever you wanted to with it. So pop in the comments what you think, and thanks for listening to all this little nonsense. Bye.